Hello, my name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions.
And I'm Proven Paradox, a guy with a lot of questions.
And you're listening to Bright on Buddhism, a podcast where we discuss East Asian Buddhism, answering listener-submitted questions from listeners just like you, and introducing concepts of Buddhism that you may or may not be familiar with in a casual, conversational setting. Enjoy.
Here, I was discussing desire with some other followers recently. Something I heard from several of them was that they found romantic desire particularly difficult to relinquish. Do you find that to be the case for yourself? How have your feelings around romance affected your practice, if at all?
I've considered it as well. It seems like it could be difficult to balance the desire for romance and companionship in life with the danger of desire and attachment. What do you think?
I feel like an outsider about many things in everyday life, but this aspect in particular does not make sense to me. I do feel romantic desire, but with far less urgency or intensity than most, at least so it seems. I watch others painfully twisting themselves into knots trying to find someone to be with, and I do not understand why they harm themselves thus. What do the teachings have to say for beings so entwined by romance?
This is a good question. Those teachings do not actually preclude relationships. Rather, they are posed as cautions and warnings. In our relationships, we must continue to acknowledge non-self, impermanence, emptiness, and non-attachment. If we lose sight of that in our relationships, then they may turn unwholesome, or they even may fail.
Interesting. So the relationships themselves are not the problem, so much as the attachment and delusion that they may foster.
Indeed.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. This week we will be discussing romantic desire and non-attachment. How does one balance romantic desire with non-attachment? Is the desire for companionship bad in Buddhism? What are the potential dangers of desire for partnership and companionship? So let's begin. How does one balance romantic desire and the desire for companionship with non-attachment?
This is a very relevant question. On one hand, we have the Buddhist ideal and the reality of living in the world as a person on the other. Of course, not all people experience romantic desire or the desire for companionship, but enough do that it is thought by modern psychologists to be a basic human need, on a similar level to fulfillment and actualization. Humans are social creatures, and the biological urge to reproduce pushes us to desire partnership, as do the needs for community, mutual understanding, and companionship. So here we are as people with these needs, and then we have Buddhist calls to work toward eliminating desire entirely. How do we make sense of this? Do we actually need to move toward eliminating all forms of desire, including companionship? The answer lies in middle way philosophy. We've talked about this a lot on the show, but for a basic intro, you can check out episode 5, What is the Middle Way, linked in the show notes. In short, the idea is that in all things we have extremes, and in the middle we have the ideal, where those extremes are held in balance and where one can be transcended. In this case, we have an extreme where somebody has completely eliminated all desire and need from themselves, and we have another extreme where somebody is completely immersed in total desire and need such that it dominates their whole behavior. Both extremes are unrealistic. As beings living in samsara, we're subject to desire per the First Noble Truth. So that eliminates option 1. That desire that we are subject to is insatiable, so sensory indulgences lead to addiction, attachment, and suffering. So that eliminates option 2. It is possible to live in the world as a person with survivalistic urges and instincts without being crushed by them. The way to do that is to practice non-attachment. For more on non-attachment, see episode 5 again, where in addition to middle way, we also discuss non-attachment, linked in the show notes. A quick way to distill this concept is to say that we must not confuse desire with need. If we feel a desire for something strongly enough, we can believe that we need the object of that desire. To bring us back to today's topic, if you have romantic desire, you can come to believe that you need a romantic partner, or you will be incomplete in some way. This simply isn't true. You can be a whole without another person. On another extreme, you may believe that you need to avoid having romantic partnerships, maybe because having them will make you immoral or incomplete in some way. That's also not true. The pursuit of celibacy should be guided by a mind seeking enlightenment and moral perfection, not anxiously avoiding immorality and imperfection. So in sum, the idea is that by freeing yourself from your attachment to your desires, whatever they may be, you can fulfill those desires, or not, without worrying about becoming subject to them. If you do not believe you need to seek or avoid romantic partnership, you're on the way to practicing non-attachment to romantic partnership. And you can have partnership or not, without putting yourself in danger of attachment and addiction.
Is the desire for companionship and romantic desire bad in Buddhism?
As with many other things in Buddhism, the answer is that it depends. The answer revolves around the issue of what you do about that desire, how that desire makes you feel, and if you're clear on what the object of that desire really is. I'll explain each of these in turn. Speaking about romantic desire influencing actions, if the desire causes you to act immorally, unethically, or in any way that creates anxiety, pain, or any other unwholesome feeling, then it's a bad desire. If acting on the desire increases that same desire or causes others, then it's a bad desire. On the other hand, if it makes one act in a positive manner that supports and cultivates compassion and wisdom in all parties involved, then it's a good desire. If acting on the desire makes other desires and attachment decrease, then it's a wholesome and good desire. Now let's speak about how the desire makes you feel. If the desire inspires feelings of obsession, loneliness, sadness, anger, desire, lust, etc., then it's a bad one. On the other hand, if it does not make you feel that way, then it is a neutral or a positive desire. Looking at whether you're clear on the object of that desire, we can say that it's quite common to think that we desire for one thing, but we really have a desire for something else. In other words, it's possible to think we desire romantic relationships of some kind, but really we have a fear of being alone, and fear is a desire for the absence of a thing. In this case, romantic desire hides a desire for the absence of loneliness. To state it another way, sometimes we may think our desire is centered around other people or another person, but in reality the desire centers around ourselves, which we then project onto others. A disagreement between the real and purported objects of desire is delusion and is unwholesome. The only way to tell the difference is self-knowledge and discernment. You have to know yourself well enough to know if you're telling yourself one thing but doing another. This can be achieved through meditation, introspection, and study. Common desires, such as romantic desire, wealth, peace and security, and more, are addressed a great deal in the Buddhist texts throughout history. Depending on who the Buddha is preaching to, he may give exhortations on how to deal with these desires that look at them as unwholesome, unproductive, and bad. But he'll sometimes instead use those desires as teaching moments and preach in such a way that poses the Dharma as a way to eliminate the desire if it's causing stress, or as a way to satisfy the desire more than material things ever could. In more concrete terms, when somebody talks about a desire for wealth to the Buddha, he'll either say, "You should work on not having that, here's how." Or he will say, "In the Dharma, you'll find more wealth than you could ever accumulate in many lifetimes. The Dharma is a treasure more precious and valuable than all precious metals and gems combined," etc. Romantic desire is the exact same. There's a story in the Pali Canon where a husband and wife couple comes to the Buddha saying that they love each other so much that they want to find each other in the next life. Instead of saying, "You guys are really too mired in desire, here's how to stop that," he instead gives them instructions on how to exert that level of control over their rebirths. Here the Buddha is a very skillful educator because the instructions entail becoming enlightened, and becoming enlightened is by definition freeing oneself from attachment as a result of desire. That's the only way to control your reincarnations. However, he's not giving them everything all at once. Understanding their capacity, he describes the foundational steps to living in accordance with the Dharma, which in this case is living in accordance with each other and being aware of each other's impermanence. So the Buddha is giving them something that will satisfy their desire in the moment, but also sets them on the path of enlightenment for the long term. This is in the Samajjivina Sutta, which I'll link in the show notes. It's not even one page in length typed, so it's quick and easy to read.
What are the potential dangers of desire for partnership and companionship?
The dangers that arise from romantic desire, and from all other desires, all fall under the purview of dukkha and delusion. Everything bad that can come from these desires lead directly to those two. One danger is attachment, which we've discussed at length. Attachment is when that desire creates a feedback loop for more desire and altered behaviors. So if somebody becomes attached to romantic relationships, they will endlessly seek them, and the absence of romantic relationships proves distressing in some way. The desire becomes insatiable, so the person pursues that desire nonstop, often to the detriment of themselves and others around them. Attachment, addiction, and obsession are all synonyms here. It's a loop where desire leads to behaviors that create more desire, and on and on. Desire, whether it's big or small, is insatiable and leads to attachment, addiction, or obsession. These lead to delusion because we unconsciously believe that our desires can be satiated by our behaviors, but they ultimately can't. As we've discussed, attachment leads to dukkha because dukkha describes the negative feeling that arises when there's a disagreement between our desires and the way the world actually is. When we discover that a desire is insatiable and become anxious or upset about that, we can then start to treat anxiety or upsetness with addictive or attached behaviors. That's how it becomes a feedback loop that can be very difficult to break out of. In the context of romantic desire, we can become possessive over another person, anxious about being alone, or self-destructive, attempting to maintain a relationship that's not working. Possessiveness over a person is unwholesome in that it doesn't acknowledge impermanence nor the other person's humanity. It's based on a self-centered desire rather than a desire for the other person. Possessive people want to feel powerful and in control more than they want to feel the joy of a relationship. Anxiety about loneliness is very similar. It does not acknowledge impermanence, and it's very self-focused. It falsely imagines a world where there is a capital S self that can be alone, and is harmed by that isolation. The doctrine of non-self has been excellent for my anxieties for this exact reason. It can be scary to acknowledge that we are fleeting and transient aggregates of material and mind, but it can also be very reassuring and liberating. It can help us cultivate non-attachment, leading to a place of equanimity about whether or not we're alone. If there is a self that can exert control over a situation, then there's no need to be worried. If there isn't a self, and according to Buddhism there isn't, then there's no use for being worried. Anxiety lies in the uncertainty between the two states, control and lack of control. It can be a feeling where we worry we may not be in control of a situation. But Buddhism tells us that there is an end to all experiences, pleasant or unpleasant. That says to me that I don't need to emotionally invest so much in the fear that something bad will happen, because I know that one day it will, and I can be prepared for that. Then, I can also not emotionally invest in the fear of something good stopping or changing. That is certain as well, and so we need not be afraid of that either. So, let's imagine that one is already in a relationship and wants to know how to approach it considering the Buddhist teaching. Sometimes it's possible that in response to anxiety about impermanence, people can become overly attached to the continuation of a relationship, even if the relationship has become unwholesome or problematic. Having discussed the issue of the possibility of starting a relationship, we can now consider the risks that come with the possibility of ending one. In Buddhism and out of it, it's well known that the mind seeks comfort, and the path of least resistance for obtaining that comfort is delusion about impermanence. I have something good now, and I want to believe that I will have that forever. So rather than confront that I won't have it forever, which is difficult and potentially scary, I decide to believe that I will have it forever. That delusion can be the seed crystal for others. If we allow that deluded belief to become entrenched in our own thought patterns, we can start to build other delusions around it. For example, if the relationship becomes bad, then again, out of fear of change, we can continue to tell ourselves that it isn't bad. This can be very dangerous for both parties involved. This situation is a microcosm of the macrocosm of delusion about much larger and more fundamental issues, such as delusion about our own mortality or that of others. In the case of delusion or anxiety around mortality, Buddhism calls on practitioners to remedy that issue by meditation on one's own mortality. In the case of relationships, Buddhism will call us to meditate on the end of that relationship. In all of these cases, Buddhism calls on us to meditate on the cessation of that which is very pleasant and positive in one's life, because of impermanence. This meditation is not meant to be exposure therapy, even if it may function that way as a side effect. Rather, it's meant to help put things into perspective. One way to cultivate a healthy perspective of non-self is to meditate on your body as being a shuffling corpse, to meditate on your body as a bag of meat and blood, to meditate on your body as carrion. Similarly, to remedy the fear and anxiety of the end of a relationship, or to remedy the delusion about a relationship being good when it actually isn't, one can meditate on that relationship ending. Meditate on the fact that relationships are temporary associations of equally temporary people. Meditate on the fact that the end of things is unavoidable. In so doing, you can become liberated from those anxieties because you recognize that, due to impermanence, these things will happen and it'll be okay when they do.
We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on romantic desire in Buddhism. Join us next week where we will be discussing Dao Sheng. Who is Dao Sheng? What did he do? What is his significance to East Asian Buddhism?
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
If you like our show and want to support us financially, we ask that you instead send that support to a worthy cause. In our previous charity throw, we directed listeners to the GoFundMe for Keith Porter Jr., a man murdered by ICE earlier this year. Between posting that and recording this message, ICE has murdered yet more people. Unfortunately, there will be even more in the near future. Changing our message for every victim of these fascist thugs is not logistically possible for us. Instead of directing to a specific person, we encourage listeners to donate to whichever ICE victim's fundraiser that has the least amount at the time you donate. If we can find them, we will have links to all of these fundraisers in the show notes. At the time of recording, the list of people murdered by ICE in 2026 includes Victor Manuel Díaz, Geraldo Lunas, Luis Gustavo Núñez, Luis Beltran Yanez, Herbert Sanchez Dominguez, Parody La, Keith Porter Jr., Alex Pretty, and Renee Good. We can get through this. Our strongest weapon is solidarity. Stay strong and help where you can. Thank you.
My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and voice of Hearer.
And I'm Dox, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has been Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have a question you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment or review, subscribing, or joining us on social media. Email us at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com or find us on Mastodon at brightbuddhism@mstdn.party. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.